I, 17, had a creepy encounter the night I'm writing this. My parents opened up a haunted house in my dad's shop, and we had a few actors. The names were obviously changed to their role. The actors were me, my dad, and my mom, my sister, bear, ghostface, cheerleader, alien, prisoner, doll, and skeleton. I know it's a lot, so let me explain how the setup was. The shop is a store in the front, a gym in the middle, storage in the back. My dad would lead the patrons into the storefront and ring the bell to let us know to get ready. Then the patron would pass Bear and Ghostface. Then they would get jump scared by Cheerleader, me, and Prisoner, and then pass through the rest. An alien would follow them. Simple. So when we were near the end of our time, Dad let in a guy, like normal. I don't want to profile him, but he seemed to be of Arabic descent or Muslim because he seemed to be wearing his clothes. He shall be known as a creepy guy. I think now I should mention, most of us are minors. Sister, Bear, Ghostface, and Skeleton are middle schoolers, and Cheerleader, Alien, and I are high schoolers. Creepy guy touches Bear's shoulder and almost pulls a knife on Bear and Ghostface. After he passed them, he didn't notice Cheerleader, but grabbed Alien and scratched his arm. After that, he stared at Prisoner and ignored me. He then started speaking in a different language. It sounded like chanting, but I don't know, towards Skeleton, Doll, and Sister. My mom then ran him off. We were on the edge for the rest of the night. So I have 3 theories. Theory 1, he was a drug addict, which was common in my place of town. Theory 2, he was a really religious man praying over us. Theory 3, he was cursing us. I'm leaning towards 2, but it was still creepy. I've been on this subreddit before, and I'm starting to realize I'm unfortunately been a magnet for this stuff my entire life. So this happened a few years ago, and my brain is still fuzzy, because honestly, I've kinda blocked this out from my memory. My older sister, 23 at the time, and myself, 20 at the time, went to Washington, D.C. 1 year, and I was super excited because I'd never been before. We started the trip with a private tour of the Capitol building, where one of her friends worked at the time. I was honestly super stoked. Even though I had already became disenchanted with politics at that age, it was still really cool to be in the building and learning about the history of the country. After that, we went to the Smithsonian and just genuinely had a lot of fun educating each other in the different subjects we were always into. I was always more math and science oriented, and she was English and history. At the end of one of the days, we were heading to the metro station to get a train back to our hotel. Now, I'd been on train platforms like this before, having visited my uncle in New York City a couple of times, and since then been stationed in Chicago with their metro system, so I have a pretty good understanding of how trains and stops work. My sister said she needed to go to the bathroom and to wait for her before I got in the train, and I told her, okay, before making my way to the kiosk to reload my card. While I was at the kiosk, I got this feeling that someone was looking at me, that overwhelming feeling of just being watched, and it was uncomfortable. I turned my head a little, and there, standing in the corner, was what I can only assume to be a homeless man based off his appearance, staring right at me with huge eyes. At first, I thought nothing of it, as we had people like this back home in Florida too, and went back to what I was doing. I pulled out my phone and started playing a game or something while I waited. Before long, my sister came back and we got on our train. We talked for a bit about what time we were getting up the next morning to catch our flight back, since it was later in the day around noon. When she started to open her mouth, I froze. Standing in the back of the train car, staring at both of us, was that same man I'd seen earlier. I'll never forget his outfit. A dirty gray hoodie, matted brown hair, a face that looked like he suffered from heavy substance abuse, dingy skin, raggedy blue jeans, and shoes with holes in them. I leaned in, not breaking eye contact, and said, "That guy was staring at me earlier, and now he's still watching us on the train." She looked at him and whispered, If he gets off when we do, we'll make a dead sprint to the hotel. Honestly, I don't know why we didn't call the police, but knowing where our hotel was, on the end of town, where things started to get sketchier, I don't think it would have made much difference for response time. The train stopped at our station and we got off. I didn't see the man follow us, so I thought we were fine. It was still about a 5-block walk to the hotel, and a really sketchy part of town. It's not that we were cheapskates, it's just all we could afford in all honesty. As we walked, we continued our previous conversation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I turned around and saw the man, hidden behind a brick wall, peeking out like Kilroy. I froze. My sister turned around and saw him too. When he realized he'd been busted, he stood straight up and gave a big cracked grin and just kept staring. I wanted to challenge him, being 6'3" and 215 pounds at the time, and yell, "What the fuck do you want?" But I remembered my previous encounter with someone following me, and just froze, barely squeaking out, "Fuck." It was about this time the man started walking towards us. I wasn't frozen anymore. We both started from a dead sprint toward the hotel. As terrifying as the situation was already, what happened next still makes every hair in my body stand straight up. The man screamed absolute nonsense loudly before letting out a Joker-esque cackle, chasing after us. I was lagging behind my sister, a little so she could get to safety before me. She was smaller than me, and I knew if I needed to, I could maybe fight this guy. I grabbed my wallet from my pocket and pulled out the room key, since it was one of those hotels where you needed to have a key to access the building. Once we were inside, I realized just how far away the guy was from me. I played football in high school, and I was still pretty fast, and I had to have had about 10 or 15 yards between us, even if I was running slower. We didn't say anything. We just went upstairs to our room and made sure it was locked in every way possible. We left super early and took an Uber to the airport. I don't know what it is about people chasing after me, and I still don't know what the dude wanted, but I really don't want to find out. I just found out about this subreddit, and I have the perfect story to tell. Before I tell this story, it's important to know that my dad is not by any means a fighter. He's not an angry man. If anything, he's a bit meek. So this happened when I, 29, was 6 years old. My dad and I went to the supermarket, and it was one of those grocery stores where there was a hot food section where you could sit and eat and kids under 10 ate for free. My dad and I were getting food at the buffet, and then we were going to pay at the cash register and go sit down. Now, this whole section of the supermarket was very small. That is, the tables for eating were very, very close to where you selected your meal. Because my meal was free, I remember asking my dad if I could go sit. He said yes, and he'd be right over. Again, he was probably going to be, at most, 20 feet away from me if I went to go sit before him. When I sat down, I remember a grown man, about my dad's age at the time, coming to sit directly across from me at the table. The table only sat 2 people. He said, "Do you mind if I eat with you?" And I just remember feeling so scared that I froze and went quiet. I didn't answer even though my 6-year-old impulse was to be polite. It was like my mouth wouldn't open. But the next thing I knew, before I even had time to feel rude for not being able to reply, my dad was right in the guy's face, grabbing him by the shirt collar. I don't remember exactly what he said to the man, but it was the first time, and one of the only times, I've ever seen my dad raging mad, and it was the first time I heard him use a swear word. I couldn't believe that my dad was actually grabbing someone physically. Next thing I know, security came over and my dad had called my mom, who was in the grocery store shopping, and there was a big commotion. Then we left the store. I actually haven't asked my dad about this in such a long time, probably since I was a teenager. I sort of want to now, to ask what ended up happening. So this happened around 2018, right after my sister moved out of our apartment together. It's been bothering me since I just moved out. I was home alone on my day off when someone knocked on my door. No one ever visits, and I have anxiety, so that was terrifying to my brain already. I answered it. and it was a woman who lived in one of the basement apartments. She seemed nice at first, asking if I wanted any clothes. She was giving away because they weren't her style, but supposedly matched mine perfectly as a young woman. That was already a red flag in my mind, because the only time I ever saw her was when I was walking to work, wearing my uniform of a black shirt, black pants, and black hat. But I let her talk because I'm super awkward and hated being rude to technical strangers. Then she started getting pushy and listing off super expensive name brands to try to get me to go to her apartment. An old small building, no cameras, and I lived on the second to top floor, which would be down what I called the creepy stairs, and next to the door to the back, no one used. Then I realized she was holding a notebook open with a script of what to say. I continued to reject, but my anxiety wouldn't let me close the door on her face, without fear of her lashing out. She kept insisting, until I finally told her my boyfriend was going to be home soon, and suggested she donated them. My boyfriend wasn't going to be home for many hours, but she didn't need to know that, obviously. She leaves, and I go back to my room, which has a window facing that back lot/alley. A few moments later, I hear a fight happening in the lot, and see her with the previous, he was already fired at that point, maintenance man. It's a loud, screaming fight, and they're standing next to his truck, which has tinted windows and a covered truck bed. My paranoia went a little wild, so I texted my family about it to feel a bit safer. Then I believe he left, but a little while later, something hits my door hard. I didn't check, just stared. Then it happened again, and again, all night, until my boyfriend came home. And for a few days when I was alone, I found out after looking at the door that they were hitting my deadbolt, and it was off-center. Even after it was replaced, the damage couldn't be fixed. It stopped after a while, and the woman moved out almost immediately after that. I don't want to feed my paranoia, but something obviously wasn't right. I know I should have called the police, but I have horrific phone anxiety. Everyone thought I was overreacting, and police in my town are relatively useless. Also, that maintenance man was rehired and was the one who replaced my deadbolt, insisting he kept that extra key, despite never needing the old one. My new house is much safer, thankfully. I could have just been paranoid as I've listened to my fair share of crime podcasts, but the more I think of it, the more odd it gets. So last night after work, I was walking my dog. It was around 11:30 p.m. I noticed a white SUV with all its lights off, but the trunk was wide open. Thought this was strange, so I made sure to walk as far from it as I could. I turned a corner and my dog stopped and started barking crazy aggressive and wouldn't move. I couldn't see anything, so we stood there for a second while I tried to figure out what he was barking at. I've never heard him bark this way, and he's very hyper and doesn't stay in one spot like that often. Finally, I see a figure dressed in all black standing under a tree. My eyes could barely make him out. He was standing behind the tree, almost trying to hide, it seemed like. I crossed to the other side of the street, and luckily saw some neighbors outside, and I had mace on me. My dog barked the entire time we could see this man. He did not like him, then walked as fast back to the apartment as possible. Could all be a coincidence, but who knows. My dog got extra rewards last night. Edit. Forgot to add that my dog has a retraceable leash that's pretty long, so I wonder if there was a point I looked like I was walking alone. My dog likes to go out as far as he can on the leash to play. In the bushes. LOL. When I was 14, pre-cell phone era, I rode my bike to Dairy Queen to visit my friend who was working there that night. It was in a very high traffic area, about 2 miles from my house. As I was chatting with my friend, I suddenly realized it had gotten dark. This was late summer, so it sort of snuck up on me. I said goodbye to my friend and started to head home. Right next to the DQ was an adult bookstore. I had to pass it on my way home. As I approached the exit driveway, A creepy guy in a beat-up car was pulling out. He yelled at me to come here. I ignored him, going around his car from behind and kept riding. He pulled out onto the busy road and drove slowly next to me, asking me to come to him. I started to panic. I turned down the next side street to get away from him. It dead-ended into an elementary school, but there was an opening for me to fit through with my bike. I contemplated doing so when I turned and noticed the creep's car slowly turning onto the road. Suddenly, I remembered somebody having mentioned one time that a girl in our class at school lived in a blue house on that road. I rode to the blue house and started banging on the door, but nobody answered. By now, the guy had pulled into a driveway further down the street and was waiting and watching me. Next thing I know, another car comes down the street and pulls into my classmate's driveway. It was my classmate and her boyfriend. They asked what was going on, and as I told them, I pointed at the car down the street. At that point, the car turned around, peeled out, and sped away. After going inside to calm down for a bit, my classmate's boyfriend put my bike in his car, and they drove me home. I shudder to think of what could have happened to me had that creep caught up with me. First of all, I want to thank you all for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I appreciate every one of you guys. And as with that said, if you guys did enjoy, please leave a like, comment, or subscribe. And as always, stay depraved.